give about a minute or so for everybody to get settled in.
Make sure you put me in there.
While everybody is getting settled in, when you take a look at your written materials, the first page of the written materials, there needs to be a change made there. I'm pretty sure it's not November 7th, 2018, so would you please scratch that out and write down December 13th, which I think it is. So, secondly, I do want to just give a bit of an announcement about next year's lunchtime programs. Instead of the alternating Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday that we've been doing over the last few years, WICLA has decided that the last Thursday of every month seems like a pretty good day because that's when the Chicago calls are kind of ending and some of the downstate calls haven't started up yet. So it looks like we're going to try and set all of the MCLEs on the last Thursday of every month. We're still waiting to get confirmation that we have this room for those dates. So as soon as everything is confirmed, all WICLA members will get a notice about the MCLE dates for next year. We are planning on having the special 3-hour professional responsibility boot camp on Lincoln's birthday next year, which I want to say is Tuesday, February 12th, 2019. And as you know, that will be the 3 hours of professional responsibility programming that we've been doing over the last few years. And it will include the 2 special 1-hour programs relating to mental health and drug abuse and to diversity issues that are part of the new professional responsibility, or not so new anymore, but part of the professional responsibility obligation. So you'll be able to cover your professional responsibility obligation with boot camp. In addition to that, we are also going to have a spring medical seminar and a fall medical seminar, and those dates are yet to be determined because we try to coordinate those with the Workers' Compensation Commission judicial training. So we need to see when that is going to happen in order to schedule the 2 medical seminars. And what I think we will try to do is do it on the Wednesday afternoon prior to the Thursday morning when the IWCC judicial training begins. So those are the announcements about next year. And in addition, we will continue to keep posting all of the programs online. So if you can't be here live, you can get your credit by looking at the programs online. And please recall that the programs will be available for the full month after they are presented live. So for example, this program, which is happening today, will be available for credit until the end of January 2019. So the programs will always be available for online credit for at least a full month after they are presented live. Okay? I know many of you, we get about 40 to 50 people who claim to have watched the programs online and are claiming the credit for them. So if you have any suggestions about how to make that easier, or if there are any recommendations you have for us about how to do those things online, please let us know anytime. Anybody have any questions about that or any issues they want to bring up about the online programs right now? All right, good. Okay, so today what we're going to do is the year-end review, and it's going to include a legislative update about Senate Bill 904, which is a bill and now a law that has been getting a lot of discussion lately. And it seems like we workers' comp lawyers are always kind of wake up late, right? Even though we've kind of been seeing this thing coming at us for several months now, all of a sudden when it becomes law, everybody's saying, well, I didn't know that this was it, or, boy, there's some problems with this thing. We didn't know about, how it was going to turn out or anything like that. So I think it's important to maybe draw upon the collective wisdom of the people here in this room to talk about some of the issues involving Senate Bill 904 and exactly what it does. So, in anticipation that that's going to take up the bulk of the time, I'd like to go to the end of the program first so that we have enough time to talk about Senate Bill 904. So basically the year-end review that I wanted to talk about in terms of the cases that we talked about were two cases that were argued in the appellate court this week. One on the 11th and one yesterday on the 12th. And these are cases that we talked about here as commission decisions. So I just want to bring to your attention that these two cases have been argued in the appellate court, and we're going to be seeing the decisions in these cases in the next few weeks. The John Johnson case versus the City of Chicago is a case that we talked about here at the beginning of 2018, and the reason why we talked about this case is that you may recall that this is the case where the arbitrator and the commission awarded a credit for overpaid maintenance benefits. And I listened to the oral argument about this case in the appellate court the other day, and this issue, which I thought was the biggest issue in the case, never came up, at least in the questioning. I'm sure it's in the briefs, but it never came up in the questioning. But let me remind you at least what the issue here is. So John Johnson was an employee of the City of Chicago, been injured at work. The case was at least initially accepted by the respondent. Some benefits were paid, ultimately permanent restrictions. He gets put into vocational rehabilitation by the City of Chicago, tries some rehabilitation for a period of time. The allegation is that he's being non-cooperative with the vocational rehabilitation, and the city terminates his benefits in August of 2015, the maintenance benefits that they're paying him for being at least a participant, maybe not a willing or a cooperative participant, but at least a participant in their vocational rehabilitation program. They pay him benefits under the maintenance provision through August of 2015. The petitioner tries his case under those circumstances on all issues, including the PPE or maintenance that's owed and the permanency. He gets an award for all issues, except including the permanency, except that the arbitrator says that the city, the respondent in the case, is entitled to a credit for overpayment of maintenance. And now you might say, what overpayment of maintenance? If the city paid him maintenance through August of 2015, and then cut off the maintenance because they said he was not cooperating, what's the overpayment? The arbitrator in this case said that in fact the petitioner had begun to not cooperate with the vocational rehabilitation program almost 2 years earlier. And so what the arbitrator said was that this overpayment of maintenance was long overdue, right? The termination of the maintenance was long overdue, and retroactively granted the city a credit for the overpayment of the maintenance 2 years earlier, right? So now the city's got a credit for 2 years worth of maintenance against the permanency award of this particular petition. And that was one of the issues that went up on review about whether it's appropriate for the arbitrator and commission to do that. And the petitioner lost that issue all the way up. It ends up in the appellate court on December 11th, so we'll see what the appellate court does here in the next few days, okay? But this is an issue that over the course of last year we've seen come up a lot, right? This idea of an overpayment, but kind of the overpayment being retroactively backdated to a date before the time when the respondent actually terminated the benefits, and now all of a sudden the petitioner might have an award for 25% loss in use of the whole person, except that there is no award because the credit eats up all of the benefits. Or a wage differential, from a certain date on, against which an overpayment of, quote-unquote, overpayment of maintenance is applied, and now the respondent doesn't have to pay those wage differential benefits for a period of time because the credit is still being eaten up, so to speak, right? So it's an issue that has come up many, many times in the last year. Here's appellate court case that is about to come down here in the next little while that is going to talk about that issue. Okay, any questions? Yeah. So the question is, isn't there some kind of like waiver principle here, like a estoppel principle? If the respondent keeps paying, right, shouldn't, right? That question was actually brought up in a different context in the oral argument on this case, and one of the lawyers responded by saying, well, these benefits were paid, and they were paid voluntarily, and Justice Hudson, I believe, responded by saying, but counsel, you understand that under the law, payment of benefits is not an admission of liability, right? So that's how the respondent and Justice Hudson responded to this idea that they paid, but it's not an admission of liability. The response to Justice Hudson, if I'm remembering correctly, was, well, of course it's not a per se admission of liability, but it's certainly an element to be considered or a factor to be considered. If the respondent didn't kind of wake up to the fact that the guy was not cooperating, even though they were paying him a weekly check, then maybe he wasn't really not cooperating, or something like that was the way the argument went. Okay? Yes? In the appellate court, it was clear that they kept talking about manifest weight, so it was clearly a question of fact. Yes? Yeah, so that's part of that kind of waiver, estoppel, detrimental reliance, I mean, whatever you want to call it, right? All he's doing is cashing checks that are being sent to him, right? He's not doing anything more than that. And in the meantime, he thinks he's cooperating. I mean, he's doing something. It may not have been exactly everything that he should have been doing, but at least he's doing a little something. So, for his check. So, yes.
Dave, you know that there's two cases, appellate court, I think, maybe Supreme Court. One's Zurich, and I think the other is Liberty. But those cases were the result of lawsuits filed by the insurance company to recover benefits that were paid, overpaid, if you will. And depending on whether it's a dispute of fact or dispute of law, a question of law, the courts ruled that in one instance you can't collect. Because as Joe pointed out, you know, it sounds in detrimental reliance. So the commission in this case simply ignores those cases and punishes the petitioner for what they believe was inappropriate conduct during the course of their rehabilitation, right?
So, yes. So
it's a penalty.
So Rich brings up that very good point, and I don't mean to make the respondent's argument for the far be it from me, but I think the respondent's argument might, in response to that, might be something like, well, we're not asking to recover it, we're recouping it as a credit against something that we owe, right? You know, it's not like we settled the case and then, you know, thought it was fraud and want to go back and get the money back because, you know, we settled the case or something like that. What the arbitrator and the commission did here was grant a credit. They granted, you've got the commission decision from the last time we talked about it. The commission decision grants a credit against the permanency award for this, and I keep doing this, I shouldn't because it's the finding of the commission, for the overpayment of the maintenance. Yes? So Maria brings up the other side of the coin, and, you know, that I think goes back to this question of, are these cases factually based? And I think they are. And, you know, the cases that the commission cited in its decision are this Hayden case and the ADN case that say that non-cooperative, you know, good faith, there's a requirement of good faith cooperation with vocational rehab, and those are one's an appellate court case and the other one's a Supreme Court case from back in the day when all the cases went to the Supreme Court first. So, yes. So the question is the petitioner entitled to some kind of notice that, hey, Cal, you're on thin ice here, you know, you better start, you know, whistling a happy tune when you come into, you know, voc rehab, you know, is there some obligation with that? I don't, maybe not, but, you know, I think that's all part of the factual pattern that the appellate court's going to be considering, right? What did the city do to tell this guy, hey, you know, get back on the straight and narrow here because you're... Right. Okay, let's move on to the next...
Okay.
Yes?
Just real quick, was there any discussion at all, I'm sorry, I don't have the original, was there any discussion at all of why the respondent didn't file a reverse 19? If you really wasn't cooperating for all that time, why didn't they have the ability to do that?
There was no discussion of that, and you're going to be penalized for not doing your homework and reading the case. All right. Okay, so let's talk about the Sheriff Smith case, which was argued in the appellate court yesterday. I listened to the oral argument on this one too. So you may recall that the Sheriff Smith case is a slip and fall in a snowy, icy parking lot that is owned, managed, controlled, and maintained by the respondent, the Manhattan Park District. The arbitrator says that this is a compensable case, both in terms of the arising out of, because the parking lot was owned, managed, maintained, and controlled by the respondent, and the arbitrator says that even though it was a natural accumulation of ice and snow, that the accidental injuries arose out of the employment because of the slip on the slippery ice and snow. The commission reverses the arbitrator's decision, and I'm not sure exactly on which one of the basings. You can see here that the commission first started talking about whether the general public could use the parking lot and whether Sheriff Smith was directed to a particular parking space. In my mind, those seem to be in the course of kinds of factors, and clearly in this case, it was owned by this parking lot was owned by the respondent, right? Owned by the respondent. So I always thought that the law was once you've established that the respondent owned the parking lot, that you're in the course of when you're on the respondent's parking lot, as long as it's within a reasonable time before or after work, right? There are some cases that say if you're there 6 hours early, you're not going to, that doesn't count. But if you're there, you know, a few minutes before or a few minutes after work, if they own the parking lot, that's in the course of. The commission goes on, though, to find that because it was a natural accumulation of ice and snow, and not an unnatural accumulation of ice and snow, that the injuries do not arise out of the employment, because even though she may have been in the course of her employment in the employer's owned parking lot, that because members of the general public could be in that parking lot too, that Sheriff Smith was not at a risk greater than the general public when she slips and falls on the icy ground, the snowy ground. The circuit court confirmed the denial of benefits from the commission, and this case was argued in the appellate court yesterday. Please, if you get a chance, listen to the oral argument. It's fascinating. It's fascinating because everybody, including myself, and I'm sure people in this room, at least from time to time, are still struggling with this idea of separating out the two issues, right? The in the course of and the arising out of. Because everybody wants to talk about whether the general public, you'll hear it in the oral argument, everybody wants to talk about whether the general public was allowed in that parking lot, and the petitioner's lawyer kept saying, it doesn't matter. It was owned by the respondent. This is a parking lot that was owned by the respondent. And the question then becomes, if it's owned by the respondent, is there some type of hazardous condition of the employer's premises on which the employee slipped and fell? And that's what a lot of the argument yesterday was all about. Is snow a hazardous condition if it is a natural natural accumulation of ice and snow? And the commission said, no, it's not hazardous if it's natural. If it's unnatural, it's hazardous, but if it's natural, it's not hazardous. My favorite case, by now you know, the Dukich case came up at least in discussion, and the respondent's lawyer in the Manhattan, in the Sheriff's case yesterday, kept saying, well, what's the difference between the rain that fell in the Dukich case and the snow that fell in the Sheriff Smith case, right? They're both forms of water that fall from the sky, and I think that might even be a direct quote from the oral argument, right? So, fascinating oral argument, and you're going to be seeing this decision come down here in the next few weeks. So any questions about this one? And yes?
Was there any discussion about whether there was any distinction about whether the accident takes place in the parking lot versus in the building?
Say it again now.
I was wondering if there's any distinction to be made where there's a parking lot, where there's a slip and fall, or something that's open to the general public and
So the inside-outside argument, right? My favorite argument from Dukich, right? If that water had been 6 inches on the inside of the threshold, it would have been a compensable case. But since it was 6 inches on the outside of the threshold, it's no longer a compensable case, even though you're still in the course of your employment at that time, right? So no, it didn't come up in this case because I guess the idea is snow can't fall inside or something. Right? And I don't, it didn't come up. The inside-outside distinction didn't come up here because it was snow in the parking lot. Okay? All right. So let's go to Senate Bill 904 because I think that's a lot of why many of you came here today. So first of all, let's talk about what Senate Bill 904 amend, right? Senate Bill 904 amended the section of the statute, specifically section 8.2D, as in dog, of the statute that talks about the payment of the interest to medical providers for bills that are not paid or paid late. All right, so that's what this law now does. It amended that particular section. So a lot of the discussion that I've been seeing on the internet, you know, with bloggers and things like that, are, you know, this idea of, hey, when did this interest provision come into play? I mean, what the heck? There's interest now on payment of late bills? Well, yeah, the answer is 2005 is when the interest provision was put into the law. Some people think it was put into the law in 2011. Wrong. 2005. Interest on late paid bills has been the law of the state of Illinois for 13 years. Okay, 13 years. Okay. Why did Senate Bill 904 even come up then? If it's been the law of the state of Illinois for the last 13 years. Well, it came up because medical providers complained that, hey, this has been the law for 13 years. But you know what we've never been paid in 13 years? Interest on unpaid medical bills. And as far as I could tell, there had never been an award of the commission or an award of an arbitrator that had awarded interest on bills, right? Did anybody in this room ever get an award for interest on unpaid medical bills? There's a lot of lawyers who try a lot of cases in this room, right? Not one award for payment of interest under a law that had been in place for 13 years. The other thing that drove Senate Bill 904 was we've been talking about these kinds of cases for the last 2 or 3 years now, where the medical providers sued the payers in circuit court, right? And the circuit court said, yeah, you got this great right to get paid and to get paid interest, but you don't have any way to access that right? There's no cause of action that you can bring provider to access that right. You're not a party to a contract, right? You're not a beneficiary of a third party contract. There's no promissory estoppel or other kinds of detrimental reliance or things like that you can state a cause of action to get paid your interest, right? So when the medical providers heard that, what they did is they went down to Springfield and they lobbied their legislators for a way to access the interest that they had not been getting paid for 13 years and that the circuit courts had been telling them there's no way for you to access. Okay, so that's kind of the background of Senate Bill 904 and why Senate Bill 904 came up. So let's examine Senate Bill 904, which is now law, right? It's now the law of the state of Illinois, Public Act 100-1117. And for those of you who are maybe not so experienced at reading law, okay, that Public Act, that 100, that part of it refers to the number of the General Assembly, right? So we have 2-year General Assemblies in the state of Illinois. They last for 2 years, right? And that's what we just celebrated, right? A few weeks ago, right? We celebrated the 200th anniversary of the state of Illinois, so that makes sense, right? If there are 2-year General Assemblies, there's been 100 General Assemblies in the 200 years. So the math actually works out pretty well, right? So the first provision that was changed in section 8.2D was kind of the introductory part of section 8.2D. And again, for those of you who are not as experienced as reading legislation, the underlined material in legislation is new, right? So what is underlined is new, and maybe this is too simplistic for most of you, but some of you may need to hear this. The underlined material is the new material. The stricken out material is what's current law that's being deleted by this new bill, right? So here's what now this introductory paragraph of section 8.2D says. Let's try and read it incorporating the new material, which is the underline. When a patient notifies a provider that the treatment, procedure, or service being sought is for a work-related illness or injury and furnishes the provider the name and address of the responsible employer, the provider shall bill the employer or its designee, insurance company, third-party administrator, directly. The employer or its designee shall make payment for treatment in accordance with the provisions of this section directly to the provider, except that if a provider has designated a third-party billing entity to bill on its behalf, payment shall be made directly to the billing entity. Providers shall submit bills and records in accordance with the provisions of this section. Okay? So anything that is not underlined or stricken out here is what the current law is, right? What the law has been for 13 years. So I'm not sure that this provision changes a whole heck of a lot. As a practical matter, I think most providers were billing the designee anyway, right? When they knew who the insurance company was, it wasn't like they were sending the bills to the employer. They were billing the insurance company. They were billing the third-party administrator. So I'm not sure that this changes a whole heck of a lot other than maybe incorporating what the practice already is, right? Any questions or concerns about this part? Okay, good. So, what Senate Bill 904, I'm just trying to get through it real quick. Yes, Rich?
One quick thought. Providers shall submit bills and records in accordance with the provisions of the section. That's been around for a long, long time, right?
I believe it has been.
Then why have we spent decades continually chasing medical records, primarily when your opponent sends you a letter and says, yeah, I got the off work note, where's the chart? So doesn't this give the providers, not the providers, but the insurance company now, if they just send a bill, even though it's got all the codes on it, but if they don't send the records, they can just sit on it, right?
Well, I don't think so, and I'm going to get into that in a second when we talk about the required data elements. Okay, so we're going to talk about that. Look, ultimately, for the payment of a bill, a provider may need the medical records, right? I get that part, but I think you're going to see later when we talk about it, the interest begins to accrue when they've received all required data elements necessary to adjudicate the bill. So I think these are two separate things, right? I think that the required data elements are separate from a requirement that they receive the medical records. Because, and I've been told this by medical billers can tell, and payers who are sophisticated enough, and all of these payers should be, they know what they're paying when they pay a bill, right? Because there's a CPT code, there's a diagnosis code, right? And if that CPT code doesn't match up with the diagnosis code, right? If the CPT code is for a removal of a bunion, but the diagnosis code is a back injury, right? It does not compute, right? And we're going to talk about this when we talk about electronic billing, which is another provision of Senate Bill 904. So. In any event, Senate Bill 904, now law of the state of Illinois, also amended sections 8.2b1 and 8.2b2. And as you can see here, the employer is now required to provide a written notification to the provider in the form of an explanation of benefits, and we're going to talk about that in just a second because there's a more specific provision regarding that. And the Medical Fee Advisory Board is supposed to come up with some rules here pretty soon about how these explanations of benefits should look. All right, any questions about this? Okay. So, the Senate Bill 904 became law because the governor's mandatory veto was overridden. Okay? So, Senate Bill 904 didn't have to go back to the governor for him to sign it, right? When the mandatory veto was overridden, Senate Bill 904 became Public Act 100-1117. But there was some concern, and we talked about this last month, right? There was some concern that there might be a couple of things that needed to be clarified about Senate Bill 904. Here's one of the clarifications, right? It's called a trailer bill, right? So House Bill 200 is a trailer bill that passed after Senate Bill 904 became law because the mandatory vetoes were overridden. It's now passed both houses, okay, but has not yet been signed by the governor. So there's some confusion out there that just like when the mandatory veto was overridden, it automatically becomes law, that somehow House Bill 200 automatically became law when it passed both houses. No, because it's a different thing, right? It was a bill, not an mandatory veto that was being voted on. So this bill is now passed both houses and going to be presented to the governor for his signature or a mandatory veto. Don't ask me what happens if this bill is not signed by the governor prior to the time when the new governor takes office, because I don't know the answer to that question. But maybe some of you will figure it out. In any event, this bill is now passed both houses. It's awaiting governor's action. What this bill did was add to the requirement that the explanation of benefits go to the provider, that it also go to the employee, right? That explanation of benefits where the payer says, I'm not paying this bill, and here's the reason why I ain't paying this bill, right? That not only should go to the provider, but also to the employee or the employee's designee being you, right? Being the lawyers in this room. The problem with this is that if you look at the section that was amended by House Bill 200, it had already been amended by Senate Bill 904, and House Bill 200 amended the unamended section. So there could be a problem with that because of the way it's not necessarily going to track. Public Bill 904 had already become law prior to the time that that House Bill 200 was passed by both houses, and it doesn't track because Senate Bill 904 had already amended this section and was now law before this bill passed, right? So, does that make any sense at all to anybody? Okay, so there may be a problem with House Bill 200 because it doesn't track. But clearly the intent is that the employee should get that explanation of benefits too, right? That's what the legislature is intending by House Bill 200. But my question was, and is, you don't have this slide because I thought about it too late to put it in the slide, right? I somehow in the back of my mind I remember, wasn't I entitled to explanations about why medical bills were getting paid? I mean, somewhere I remember reading it in the act or reading it in the rules, and lo and behold, sometimes even I am right about what I remember. So everybody knows that in section 19L, right? If the petitioner says, hey, why aren't you paying this bill, respondent, the respondent has a certain period of time to respond in writing why they're not paying the bill, right? Or penalties under section 19L, right? So there was already a provision that required an explanation in writing in the act or penalties. And there's provision in the rules too, right? Rule 9110.70, right? Everybody remembers this, right? Petitioner's lawyer can write a letter to the respondent that says, hey, why aren't you paying this bill, right? And the respondent has to give a written explanation about why the bill is not being paid by this rule, otherwise penalties, right? So there was already something requiring something in writing. The question now becomes, is the explanation of benefits a substitute for the requirements of 19L and the rule, right? Or vice versa, right? Is the explanation under the 19L or the rule a substitute for the explanation of benefits, okay? That makes sense? Everybody understand that part of it? Any questions, comments, concerns about that? Okay, good.
Dave,
Yes?
really quickly, do either of these bills actually define the word designee anywhere?
No, and you know, that's very interesting. So the question is, what is designee defined, right? And it's because by custom and practice, right, whenever the Workers' Compensation Act refers to employer or employee, even though it's not specifically defined, right, everybody in Springfield understood that that meant the employer or the insurance company or the third-party administrator, right? Or the employee meant the employee or the employee's attorney, right? People just, for as long as I've been around, just assume that the word employee included insurance company, third-party administrator, right? And the word employer or employee included, did I get that back from Tino, right? That it was included in the word.
I guess my question is, when you talk about the trailer bill, you talk about designee being the employee's attorney. But when you talk about Bill 904, where he talks about the provider shall bill the employer or its designee, am I as a respondent attorney now the designee as well? If I get a bill, does that count?
No, I think, no. Well, I don't know. Maybe that's for some further litigation. My guess is that the custom and practice is going to apply, right? That you're not the designee, that your client, the insurance company or the third-party administrator, is the designee, even though on the appearance I get that you put the respondent as your client. My guess is that people are gonna take that to mean the payer, right? The insurance company or the third, they don't care about sending their bill to you, you don't pay it, right? They want to send their bill to the party who's gonna pay it.
But I guess my question is, if I send a subpoena to a provider in a disputed case, I didn't have any records or bills yet, but there are bills in that subpoena response, has the clock now started if those bills are properly formatted?
Yeah, but presumably, right, presumably, the insurance company would have been billed by the provider prior to the time that it took you to get the response to the subpoena, right? And by the way, okay, I see you're shaking your head, but that's why the electronic billing provisions here are going to be important, right? Because there's not, if this electronic billing works out the way it's supposed to, right? There's not going to be any question about who received it or when they received it, right? There's going to be an electronic stamp on something that says, look, whether you read it, whether you opened it, you received it, right? So that, you know, so the doctors, the providers think that electronic billing provision is going to clarify some of those kinds of issues. Okay, so let's talk about what Senate Bill 904 says about when interest applies, right? When does interest, yes, Chris.
One more question. I'll come back to discussion about designee. You just talked about House Bill 300, and you're saying us as employers aren't necessarily going to consider designee. But why would the language in House Bill 300 then say certain designations the provider is the employee or his or her designee in the form of explanation of benefits? So that suggests to me that was you.
Okay, so maybe you're right. So maybe sending the bill to you does start the clock ticking, right? Don't tell the docs that you think that, right? Okay, so yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe you're right about that. All I mean is that I can tell you with a pretty high degree of certainty that the people in Springfield think that the employer's designee is the insurance company, right? I can tell you that when they hear that phrase, employer's designee, they think it's the insurance company. Because the employer's lawyer is not responsible for the payment of the bill, right? Right? Maybe you're right. Maybe it needs you too. Yes.
Okay, following up on his thought, the one question I get asked all the time, I don't know, you and I haven't had this discussion, where there is an accepted part of a case and a non-accepted part of the case. And someone as sharp as him would write me and say, will you give me a letter denying this part of the case so I can have my claimant put it through group? I believe, it's my view from this legislation now that I have to send an EOB. Do you agree with that?
Yes, sure.
I need to develop EOB capability and or tell my client I need an EOB. I can't just write him a letter and say, this is denied under the compact.
Well, so that's the question I brought up about 19L in the rule, right? Okay. Is an EOB going to be a substitute for the explanation required under Section 19L, or vice versa, right? Is the explanation under 19L going to be a substitute for the EOB, right? Or is the written explanation under the rule going to be a substitute for the EOB or vice versa, right? My guess is probably not, right? Because the legislature is not presumed to do things that don't make sense, right? But they're presumed to do things that make sense, right? And so why would you add an EOB if there was already an EOB requirement, right? So my guess is that you should probably do both things, right? You should probably instruct your client to issue the EOB and respond to my 19L letter saying, why don't you pay benefits, right? Is it a little extra work? Yeah, I suppose it is, okay? But the problem is that we've not been doing the little bit of extra work for the last 13 years, right? And this is what the payers got, or the providers got because of it, right? Because we as lawyers some of us buried our heads in the sand about this payment of interest and just hoped that it would go away, which it did for 13 years, right? Right? But now we may have to pay the price for having ignored that for 13 years, right? So that was the point I was trying to bring up about the 19L and the rule, right? Are they interchangeable with an EOB? Is it an equivalent substitute? I suppose that there might be some litigation about that when, you know, the first provider files its lawsuit for $2.4 million in interest, you know, over in the Circuit Court of Cook County. I suppose somebody's going to make the argument that, hey, I sent their lawyer a 19L letter, and the lawyer from Winston and Strawn, who's representing the provider for the $2.4 million, says, what's 19L, right? Judge, you don't have a right to look at Section 19L. We're here to collect our interest, right? So, best practice, both, right? A little extra work, sure. Yes.
But there's really no sanction because we've always had this written explanation, a rule or whatever we want to call it. And even when you allege, when you submit bills and suggest that there has never been any written explanation, so you set it up for your opponent to try and cover that issue, you don't get 19L penalty. I can't recall a case in the last 2 decades where anybody got 19L penalties because a bill wasn't paid.
So maybe the providers, just like the providers got the Senate Bill 904, maybe we need to get some legislation.
But yeah, we need more changes.
Yeah. So it's an issue, right? This idea of a written explanation, is that the same thing as an EOB or not? Don't forget the Medical Fee Advisory Board is going to be promulgating some rules about this. So maybe the medical or the commission, with the advice of the Medical Fee Advisory Board, is going to be promulgating some rules about this. Maybe it'll be clarified in whatever rules are, promulgated. Okay. So let's talk about the conditions for the payment motion. I'm sorry.
No, how you feel?
Let's talk about the conditions for the payment of interest, okay? 3 conditions for payment of interest, okay? 2 of which have always been the law for the last 13 years, right? So people who are now saying, we gotta pay interest when we don't pay a bill, yeah, that's been the law for 13 years, right? 3 conditions, right? Read the added third condition, right? Non-payment of the bill, right? Non-payment of a portion of the bill, right? Or failure to send an EOB. Those are the 3 conditions under which interest applies, right? So the question becomes, would there ever be a situation where a provider, and notice that it's the word or between those 3 conditions, right? It's small Roman numeral 1, small Roman numeral 2, or small Roman numeral 3. Would there ever be a situation where there was not an explanation of benefits paid or issued, but the bill had been paid already, and the provider would sue for interest because there was no EOB issue? I suppose that could be an absurd result, right? That even though you paid the bill, because it says or, right, you didn't issue an EOB, you get hit with interest because you didn't issue the EOB. But interest on what? The bill's been paid, right? So, I don't think that these are really like 3 separate conditions, right? I think the word or is there because the General Assembly didn't mean to say you needed all 3 of them before you could get interest. Because if you substitute the word and there, right, that would say you have to do, there's got to be all 3 of these here before you can get interest, right? So, I don't think that the General Assembly intended the absurd result of the bill having been paid, right, but no EOB, and a provider getting interest because there was no EOB issued on a paid bill. I can tell you with a pretty high degree of certainty that what the providers are trying to do is get paid, right? They're not trying to make interest. They're trying to get paid. So they see this as a deterrent more as a revenue maker, right? They see it as a deterrent more than a revenue maker. All right? All right. Here's another trailer bill, okay, that also passed the both houses, but has not yet been signed by the governor. As you can see here, it's different from that House Bill 200, right? Because this bill says, if and only if Senate Bill 904 passes, right, and becomes law, and we're amending the section the way it's been amended under Section 904, right? So it's different from House Bill 200, although it has not yet been signed by the governor. Okay? So let's go back to Senate Bill 904. Okay? Here's the thing, right? Here's the thing about Senate Bill 904, right? Failure to pay interest, right, is now going to give the provider a cause of action in the circuit court to collect the interest. Okay? The provider is going to have a cause of action in the circuit court for collection of the interest. Right? I anticipate that that's going to be captioned something like provider versus Hartford Insurance, right? Or provider versus City of Chicago, right? You know, that kind of thing, right? So I think that those are going to be the parties, right? The provider, right? And the payer, right? Whoever is responsible for the payment of the bill. And I didn't mean to single out the City of Chicago in any way whatsoever. I'm just using that as an example. Please, I'm sorry. Let me change that to the City of Kathmandu or something, okay? All right. Laredo, the City of Laredo. So anyway, so that's it. So what does this new cause of action, what are some of the issues that are maybe brought up in this new cause of action? Okay? Venue issues, maybe, right? What's the proper venue for this? Where the bill was issued from, where the service was rendered, where the employer is, you know, what are the issues, right? What about statute of limitations, right? What's the statute of limitations on one of these kinds of cause of actions, right? Who are the necessary parties, right? Who are the necessary parties to this, right? Those are maybe some issues that we will see playing out in some of these. Anybody see any other issues in the circuit court action? Rich?
Does the 1% a month compound? So if month one you take 1% of the bill, and then the next month you take 1% of the bill plus the 1% you put the month before, and so on, all the way to the end of the year?
So the question is, does it compound? It doesn't say specifically that it does not compound. My guess and opinion is that it probably does not compound, but I think the providers are okay with 12% a year, even though it's not compounding. So, yes?
The Sheriff Smith case, you've got to, let's just say the arbitrator denied it, the commission denies it, the circuit court confirms denial, the appellate court writes it. The appellate court flips everybody and says, no question is compensable. It takes 5 years to get there. There's $500,000 in medical bills. When does interest start?
Okay, so let's go back to the slide, right? That most of which has been the law of the state of Illinois for the last 13 years. Okay, so anything that's not underlined here is stricken out. Been the law for 13 years. I don't see, and we can have a legitimate difference of opinion or disagreement here, but I don't see any condition in the application of the interest that says, as long as the respondent has not disputed the bill, right? I don't see that it says that, right? I don't see that a dispute of the bill, whether causation, accident, duration, you know, utilization review, whatever it is, right? I don't see that a dispute of the bill tolls the interest, right? Or stops the interest or prevents the interest. I don't see that in the act, and this has been the law for 13 years. So it's never, as far as I'm concerned, for 13 years, it's never been the law that a dispute, now you don't have to pay interest, right? The respondent asserts a dispute to a case, I'm not going to pay the medical bill for whatever reason, accident, causation, whatever it might be, therefore I don't have to pay interest. I don't see that that's a defense to the payment of interest in the law as it has existed for 13 years. By the way, of which Senate Bill 904 change is not a thing, right? Doesn't change a thing about that. Yes?
With nothing but the greatest respect, in the scenario I'm giving you, for the insurance carrier to pay the bill when an arbitrator denies it, the commission denies it, the circuit court denies it, they're basically giving money away. And I've got clients that are saying the EOB should say that the case is denied. And then if that's reversed, now we'll consider paying it, and that's when interest might start.
Yeah,
We don't know is the short
I
answer.
hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying.
Okay.
We know only that the legislature did not intend to observe the law. That's all we know.
That's what we know, sure. Yes, but take the reverse example, right? Take the other example, right? Arbitrator says this is a compensable case. We're not paying, we're reviewing to the commission. Commission says it's a compensable case. We're not paying, we're reviewing to the circuit court. On up to the appellate court affirms, right? Of course it's a compensable case, right? Of course it's a compensable case. What difference does it make that the respondent disputed it at the beginning in terms of the payment of the interest, right? Right. So I mean, so there's that issue too. Yes.
Can an employee waive the provider's right to interest? We're getting a lot of contracts that say respondent shall not be responsible for interest.
Yeah. Most.
That really doesn't mean anything because I don't think the employee can waive the provider's.
Yeah, most arbitrators have been scratching out that kind of language for the last 13 years, right? Right? I mean, right? When in 2006, when this first became law, right? A lot of respondents put in there, oh yeah, the petitioner's waiving the interest, right? A lot of arbitrators would scratch out that language and say, petitioner can't waive the interest. And by the way, the new law now says interest under this subsection is only payable to the provider. An employee is not responsible for the payment of interest under this section, right? So now it's been made clear, even though many of us thought that was the law all along, right? That the petitioner couldn't waive the interest on behalf of the provider, right? Which is what the providers were angry about in the first place, right? That they didn't have a way to access our system. And what they wanted, right? They wanted to access our cases directly, right? Some of the providers did, right? They wanted to get into our cases, right? Talk about delay or, right? They wanted to become a party to our cases, right? The way the legislature decided to solve that was by giving the providers this separate cause of action in the circuit court so that they wouldn't be part of our case at the commission, right? Yes.
So you're interpreting that language to say that in no uncertain terms, we as practitioners cannot make a claim now to the commission for that interest on behalf of the provider.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm going to tell you why in just a second, right? So here's the trailer bill, right? So there again, there was some concern about the intent behind this, right? Were we giving the circuit court, right? Were we giving the circuit court the right to determine the compensability of the bill, right? To determine the accident, or to determine the causation, or to determine utilization review issues, right? Clearly, the legislature didn't intend that, and they clarified it with this bill, saying, look, all we're talking about in terms of this new circuit court action is the interest. That's all we're talking about. It's a mathematical calculation, right? It's nothing more than that. It's not about the compensability of the bill or anything else. When does the interest begin to run? Okay, when does it begin to run? It begins to run 30 days from the receipt of a bill that contains substantially all the required data elements necessary to adjudicate the bill, right? So this doesn't say anything about receipt of medical records, right? Like the question that was asked earlier. This says 30 days from the receipt of that kind of bill, and I want to talk about that for just a second, real super quickly. I'm so sorry this is going over things. But what does it mean? What does required data elements mean, okay? Medical billers know what that means, right? This is a term of art. There's a definition of required data elements. I don't ever remember the numbers of those forms. I always call them UB40s, but I know that that's a reggae band and not the form. It's UB something or other, right? So a certain number of those fields filled out in that form constitute the required data elements, right? Things like the diagnosis code, the CPT code, the zip code where the service was rendered, things like that, right? Those are the required data elements. 30 days after a payer receives that kind of bill, right? Guess what? Interest starts ticking, right? All right. I'm sorry, that's a... All right, applicability and effective date. We've talked about this a lot here when we talked about statutory changes. There's two different dates that are important, right? The effective date of the law, this one became effective on the date that the last amendatory veto was overridden, November 27, 2018. So that's the effective date, right? The applicability is to procedures, treatments, and services rendered on or after the effective date, right? So not when the case was filed, not when the accident happened, not when anything else occurred. When the treatment was rendered, if it was after November 27, 2018, this new interest cause of action in the circuit court applies. What happens with the interest prior to November 27, 2018, I don't know. I mean, we haven't seen an interest award in 13 years. I don't know why we would see, those awards now. But in any event, that's the applicability date and effective date. Okay? There's some concern, and this goes, I think, to your question, Dave. There's some concern, and you don't have this slide. I apologize because it was brought up to me later, and I thought about it. Section 8.2E20 was not amended, okay? So what Section 8.2E20 says is that, this kind of stay that the petitioner's lawyers get about paying the bills while the case is pending before the Workers' Compensation Commission, right? Everybody's aware of that, right? A provider cannot take collection actions if the case is pending. If you're telling the provider, hey, chill out, I'm working on this case, I'm going to get you paid, don't worry about it, right? That they can't take any collection action, right? Well, the law's always been that once that case is resolved, settlement or award, right? Now, of course, the provider can look into the injured worker for payment of their money, okay? But what it also said was the employee shall be responsible for payment of any outstanding bills for procedure, treatment, or service rendered by a provider, as well as the interest awarded under section, the interest, right? And that has not been changed by Senate Bill 904. So this is still the current law. So is there some conflict between that language that we read, right, that said interest is all for the providers, the employee shall not pay the interest? Is there some conflict between that section and this section? Maybe, but maybe that conflict can be resolved by looking at the word awarded there, right? Interest awarded, right? So if interest is awarded to the petitioner in the workers' compensation case, then of course the provider can ask the petitioner, please pay me the interest that you got awarded on my behalf in the case, except that we know that interest was never awarded in a case up until now, and I don't expect that will change, right? So I don't, it appears that it's a conflict, right? But once you factor in that word awarded, maybe it's not such a big conflict as it originally appeared. Electronic medical billing, read this, the providers think that this is really the solution to late payment of bills, right? Because there's none of this BS about, you didn't send me the records, you didn't do this, that doesn't look right, blah, blah, blah. And they send out an electronic bill, right? And the payer's system accepts the electronic bill as a clean bill, or it doesn't, right? It shoots it back and says, you forgot to fill in the CPT code, or you forgot to fill in the diagnosis code, right? So a lot of the medical providers think that really the electronic medical billing part of this new law is really the most important part, although some of them want their interest. So, Senate Bill 1737 also, the governor's mandatory vetoes were overridden on this one. Senate Bill 1737 had to do with interest oversight, or yeah, I'm sorry, I got interest on the brain. Insurance oversight, right? Insurance oversight. Illinois is now going to change from a system where it used to be that the insurance companies could use rates before they filed them with the Department of Insurance. Now this new law flips that around and says they got to file the rates before they can use them. Okay, they got to file them 30 days before they can use them, and presumably the Department of Insurance can use that 30 days to see if the rates make sense or should be different. Premium increase notice, right? When an employer receives a premium renewal from an insurance company, it is now going to be required that the insurance company explain if the premium is more than 5% different from the NCCI recommended rate. The NCCI recommended rate for 2019 is negative 8.5. So NCCI is recommending an 8.5% reduction in premiums. So if I'm doing my math correctly here, unless the premium has gone down by 3.5% or more, the insurance company has to explain to that insured why that is, right? We took all those losses on those fires out in California, and we have to figure out a way to make those up, or we really want to just make a bigger profit this year, you know? So whatever it is, it requires the insured to be notified and to be explained to the insured why their premium is not going down by as much as NCCI recommended. All right, I'm sorry for keeping you longer. I'm happy to. Anybody wants to sit down and talk more about it? You're welcome.